is it that haunts and tempts me thus? Cried the minister to himself, at length pausing in the street and striking his hand against his forehead. Am I mad? Or am I given over utterly to the fiend? Did I make a contract with him in the forest and sign it with my blood? And does he now summon me to its fulfillment by suggesting the performance of every wickedness which his most foul imagination can conceive? At the moment when the Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale thus communed with himself and struck his forehead with his hand, old Mistress Hibbins, the reputed witch lady, is said to have been passing by. She made a very grand appearance, having on a high headdress, a rich gown of velvet, and a ruff done up with the famous yellow starch, of which Anne Turner, her especial friend, had taught her the secret, before this last good lady had been hanged for Sir Thomas Overbury's murder. Whether the witch had read the minister's thoughts or no, she came to a full stop, looked shrewdly into his face, smiled craftily, and, though little given to converse with clergymen, began a conversation. So, Reverend Sir, you have made a visit into the forest, observed the witch lady, nodding her high headdress at him. The next time I pray you to allow me only a fair warning, and I shall be proud to bear you company. Without taking overmuch upon myself, my good word will go far towards gaining any strange gentleman a fair reception from yonder potentate you wot of. I profess, madam, answered the clergyman, with a grave obeisance, such as the lady's rank demanded, and his own good breeding made imperative. I profess, on my conscience and character, that I am utterly bewildered as touching the purport of your words. I went not into the forest to seek a potentate, neither do I at any future time design a visit thither with a view to gaining the favor of such personage. My one sufficient object was to greet that pious friend of mine, the Apostle Eliot, and rejoice with him over the many precious souls he hath won from heathendom. Ha ha ha! Cackled the old witch lady, still nodding her high headdress at the minister. Well, well, we must needs talk thus in the daytime. You carried off like an old hand, but at midnight and in the forest we shall have other talk together. She passed on with her aged stateliness, but often turning back her head and smiling at him, like one willing to recognize a secret intimacy of connection. Have I then sold myself, thought the minister, to the fiend whom, if men say true, this yellow-starched and velveted old hag has chosen for her prince and master? The wretched minister! He had made a bargain very like it. Tempted by a dream of happiness, he had yielded himself with deliberate choice, as he had never done before, to what he knew was deadly sin. And the infectious poison of that sin had been thus rapidly diffused throughout his moral system. It had stupefied all blessed impulses and awakened into vivid life the whole brotherhood of bad ones. Scorn, bitterness, unprovoked malignity, gratuitous desire of ill, ridicule of whatever was good and holy, all awoke to tempt, even while they frightened him. And his encounter with old Mistress Hibbins, if it were a real incident, did but show its sympathy and fellowship with wicked mortals and the world of perverted spirits. He had by this time reached his dwelling on the edge of the burial ground, and hastening up the stairs took refuge in his study. The minister was glad to have reached this shelter without first betraying himself to the world by any of those strange and wicked eccentricities to which he had been continually impelled while passing through the streets. He entered the accustomed room and looked around him on its books, its windows, its fireplace, and the tapestried comfort of the walls, with the same perception of strangeness that had haunted him throughout his walk from the forest dell into the town and thitherward. Here he had studied and written, here gone through fast and vigil and come forth half alive, here striven to pray, here borne 100,000 agonies. There was the Bible in its rich old Hebrew, with Moses and the prophets speaking to him, and God's voice through it all. There on the table with the inky pen beside it, was an unfinished sermon with a sentence broken in the mist, where his thoughts had ceased to gush out upon the page 2 days before. He knew that it was himself, the thin and white-cheeked minister, who had done and suffered these things and written thus far into the election sermon. But he seemed to stand apart and eye this former self with scornful, pitying, but half-envious curiosity. That self was gone. Another man had returned out of the forest, a wiser one, with a knowledge of hidden mysteries which the simplicity of the former never could have reached. A bitter kind of knowledge at that. While occupied with these reflections, a knock came at the door of the study, and the minister said, "Come in," not wholly devoid of an idea that he might behold an evil spirit. And so he did. It was old Roger Chillingworth that entered. The minister stood white and speechless, with one hand on the Hebrew Scriptures and the other spread upon his breast. "Welcome home, reverend sir," said the physician. "And how found you that godly man, the Apostle Eliot? But methinks, dear sir, you look pale, as if the travel through the wilderness had been too sore for you. Will not my aid be requisite to put you in heart and strength to preach your election sermon?" "Nay, I think not so," rejoined the Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale. "My journey in the sight of the holy apostle yonder, and the free air which I have breathed, have done me some good, after so long confinement in my study. I think to need no more of your drugs, my kind physician, good though they may be, and administered by a friendly hand." All this time, Roger Chillingworth was looking at the minister with the grave and intent regard of a physician towards his patient. But in spite of this outward show, the latter was almost convinced of the old man's knowledge, or at least his confident suspicion, with respect to his own interview with Hester Prynne. The physician knew then that in the minister's regard he was no longer a trusted friend, but his bitterest enemy. So much being known, it would appear natural that a part of it should be expressed. It is singular, however, how long a time passes before words embody things, and with what security two persons who choose to avoid a certain subject may approach its very verge and retire without disturbing it. Thus, the minister felt no apprehension that Roger Chillingworth would touch, in express words, upon the real position which they sustained toward one another. Yet did the physician, in his dark way, creep frightfully near the secret. "Were it not better," said he, "that you used my poor skill tonight? Verily, dear sir, we must take pains to make you strong and vigorous for this occasion of the election discourse. The people look for great things from you, apprehending that another year may come about and find their pastor gone." "Yes, to another world," replied the minister with pious resignation. "Heaven grant it be a better one. For in good sooth I hardly think to tarry with my flock through the flitting seasons of another year. But touching your medicine, kind sir, in my present frame of body, I need it not." "I joy to hear it," answered the physician. "It may be that my remedies, so long administered in vain, begin now to take due effect. Happy man were I, and well deserving of New England's gratitude, could I achieve this cure." "I thank you from my heart, most watchful friend," said the Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale with a solemn smile. "I thank you, and can but requite your good deeds with my prayers." "A good man's prayers are golden recompense," rejoined old Roger Chillingworth, as he took his leave. "Yea, they are the current gold coin of the New Jerusalem, with the king's own mint mark on them." Left alone, the minister summoned a servant of the house and requested food, which, being set before him, he ate with ravenous appetite. Then, flinging the already written pages of the election sermon into the fire, he forthwith began another, which he wrote with such an impulsive flow of thought and emotion that he fancied himself inspired, and only wondered that heaven should see fit to transmit the grand and solemn music of its oracles through so foul an organ pipe as he. However, leaving that mystery to solve itself, or go unsolved forever, he drove his task onward with earnest haste and ecstasy. Thus the night fled away, as if it were a winged steed, and he careering on it. Morning came and peeped, blushing through the curtains. And at last sunrise threw a golden beam into the study and laid it right across the minister's bedazzled eyes. There he was, with the pen still between his fingers and a vast, immeasurable tract of written space behind him.